You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. It is Thursday, June 12th, 2025. 9 years since the Pulse tragedy in Orlando took the lives of 49 people. It was Latin night at the LGBTQIA Plus nightclub on June 12, 2016, when a gunman entered shortly after 2 a.m. and began shooting. Once the gunshot started, several people, including Orlando Torres, hid in the bathroom. The first 2 minutes of our conversation about gun violence and trauma might be difficult to listen to for some, as Torres describes how he survived the shooting and the 3-hour standoff hiding in the bathroom.
Unfortunately, when I was in the restroom, I had no exit, and when I heard it was the loud popping sounds, and I was with a friend, and my friend said, "No, that's a DJ's music effect." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I've heard it before many times here, but it was just too crisp and clear." And, I said no. And we ended up in this small stall, locked the door, laid on top of the toilet bowl with my feet up. And my friend followed my lead, sat on the toilet bowl with the feet up. And in case the government comes in, he doesn't see our feet underneath and thinking there's no one in the stall. But unfortunately, he shot in the stall next to us, which was 2 stalls only in that restroom that we were in, which the back one was the handicap one. And we had no exit out. There were no windows, even though there was a break where he exited out, continuing shooting out there. We just were really, really stuck there throughout the whole 3.5 hours of suffering. Those that were shot, injured, that were bleeding to death and in pain, and texting families. And, I text my managers that they call the cops, there's a gunman in here. And, I try calling the police department, but the phone lines were so busy. It was like, I think everybody was calling. So it was very hard to get through to, the 911 to get emergency assistance there as soon as possible, unfortunately.
We will hear more from Orlando Torres later. SWAT teams breached the building, and Orlando police killed the gunman in a shootout around 5:15 that morning. At the time, the loss of 49 lives marked the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. More than 50 people were also wounded in the attack. Those without physical injuries still live with the pain and scars of what happened at Pulse. Brandon Wolf is one of the survivors of the Pulse shooting, and I was able to speak to him on Monday. He now works as the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign, a LGBTQ plus civil rights organization. Brandon Wolf starts our conversation, though, by reflecting on what happened 9 years ago today.
What's weighing heavy on my heart this remembrance is how much has changed and how little has changed over the last 9 years. So much about my own life is different than it was 9 years ago. I quit my job in corporate America. I went full-time into the fight for LGBTQ plus rights in this country, full-time into the fight against gun violence in this country. So a lot personally is different from June 12th of 2016. And so much is unchanged about our country and the political climate that we're in.
What happened at Pulse inspired a lot of activism. It sounds like perhaps yours included. Can you speak to successes you've had as an activist in this time?
Sure. 6 days after the Pulse shooting, we had a funeral service for my best friend, Drew, and I made a promise to him that day as I was helping to guide the casket down the aisle. I promised him that I would never stop fighting for a world that he would be proud of. But what I've learned over the last 9 years is that was never really about Drew, and it was never really about me either, because the world that he would be proud of is a world all of us can be proud of. It's a world where young queer people know they are loved and valued exactly as they are. It's a world where we don't have to be afraid to go to get a drink with our friends, go to the movies, go to school, that will come face to face with the barrel of an AR-15. And some of the wins I think that I would celebrate over the last 9 years are moments where we've broken through and given people hope that future is possible. We launched an organization called the Drew Project, and to date, we've given over $250,000 in college funding away in honor of our best friend. Those young people that we have helped go to college inspire me a lot. That feels like a win. And, we've made incredible policy progress too. I mean, in 2018, Florida passed the first gun safety legislation in decades. And then we went on to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act with the help of President Joe Biden, which was the nation's first gun safety legislation in over 2 decades. We helped to elect pro-equality candidates who believe in common sense gun safety reforms all across this country.
On the flip side, what failures do you think that you've had as an activist? What are you still working on? And what would you say to those people who would counter your argument that gun control is not going to change the outcomes of violent people, that the focus needs to be on mental health instead?
If anyone wants to have a substantive conversation about making healthcare accessible to anyone, no matter their income, and that includes physical and mental health care, I'd love to have that conversation. I would say the things that maybe I've learned as an advocate, the challenges that I still face today, and the work that we still have left to do, is when you get, I think, deep in the policy weeds and you start talking about policy solutions to big problems, you can lose the humanity of it all. And sometimes, especially in the LGBTQ plus rights space, I think we don't do a good enough job centering the people, their full humanity, who are being impacted by lack of policy solutions around equality. So I think I have a lot of work to do. We as a movement have a lot of work to do to recenter the stories of people who are directly impacted. We're not talking about theoretical policy proposals. We're talking about a teenager who wants to play soccer with their friends, right? And more centering the humanity behind people. That is work that I know we have to do. And finally, you asked about what do you say to people who think there is no policy that's going to push back against gun violence in this country. And I would say the data tells you you're wrong. Every ounce of data that we have around, gun safety solutions says that when we take intentional efforts to ensure people we know to be a danger to themselves and others do not get access to deadly weapons, violence falls, harm falls in communities. I'm just trying to save people's lives, and I'm going where the data tells me we need to go, which is a combination of making people whole and well, investing in them, investing in their humanity to try to stop the seeds of violence from growing. And we also need policy solutions that ensure dangerous people don't get their hands on the deadliest of weapons.
I want to ask you about some of the things that are happening this week. The FBI is meeting with families and survivors this week in Orlando. What does it feel like to have the official investigation coming to a close?
It's an odd feeling, the word closed, because there is no closure when it was your life that was uprooted and devastated. There's no closure when the people you loved most are forever missing faces at birthday parties and empty seats at dinner tables. So I don't know how closed sits with me, but I think what I might challenge my friends in the broader community and certainly people in law enforcement to consider is the ongoing ramifications of the violence that happened at Pulse and the ways in which systems failed people, whether or not it was determined that this person carried out an act that was specifically targeting LGBTQ plus people, right? So the fact that LGBTQ plus people often don't have the same rights around, let's say, partnerships, marriages as others, and the way that helps them get access to caring as a next of kin. The fact that it was Latin night and many people in the club that night or their families are undocumented, and the only way to get access to care or even be identified as a family member was to go to the FBI first. There are these systemic barriers between people and the resources and care that they need and needed after Pulse. I guess my request to not just federal law enforcement, but law enforcement generally, to elected officials, is think about how to fix those systems so that if and when this happens again to another community, they don't have to jump over hurdles to get the basic things they need when they're most traumatized, when they most need support. Whether or not a single investigation is closed doesn't change the fact that we have systems that need fixing.
You have carried the weight of what happened at Pulse for 9 years now. And Brandon, you've spoken openly about that guilt that you felt for surviving. Has that shifted or evolved for you over the last 9 years?
I think I've learned to grow around the grief and the guilt and the pain. There really is no way of fixing it. It doesn't ever go away. You learn to live alongside it, right? It is another piece of you on the journey. I would say that some of the ways I've most successfully combated that sense of survivor's guilt, I wrote a lot about this in my memoir. One is I gave myself permission to feel joy again. And that takes intentional daily work to tell yourself that it's okay to laugh and to smile and to dance, even when there are others who can't be here to do that. And perhaps it is even more important that you experience those things in their honor. So that has taken real intentional work. I have a great therapist, and I'm grateful for access to mental health care. Finally, I would say I also found power in purpose and allowed myself to feel obligated because I am still here to carry on the stories of those who can't be here anymore. So I think it helps take the edge off the guilt to feel like I'm keeping pieces of the people that I love the most alive, that I'm making sure that they're seen not just as names on a wall somewhere or just two more on America's long list of victims, but in their full, rich humanity as they lived. That helps me feel less guilty and more purposeful in my work.
That leads me into wanting to ask you about the way to memorialize what happened. You have revisited the site of Pulse in the years since it happened. The city of Orlando is opening up the building for private visits for survivors and families of victims before it is torn down to make space for that permanent memorial. What feelings come up for you thinking about it being open for the last time?
I am so glad that people for whom this is a sense of closure or peace will get the opportunity to be in that space. I've said from the beginning that I'm not particularly personally invested in what happens to the space, what it looks like, what colors the memorial are, whether or not the building stays or goes. What I've always wanted is that that space is what people need it to be, and that it tries to meet people where they are, meet the community where they are, that it brings people a sense of peace, of solace, that they can be close to the people who were stolen from them while they're there.
Looking ahead, as time goes on, as the years pass, people are going to visit this site, the memorial, who weren't there, and they're going to get farther removed from it in time. What do you want those people to take away in the future when they stand at that Pulse Memorial in the future?
I want it to feel somber. I want it to be a place of reflection. I want the gravity of what happened to weigh on people's shoulders. I want people to understand the ingredients that led to what happened on June 12th of 2016, to consider the cost of violence, of hate. You know, hate is dangerous on its own. Armed hate is deadly, and militarized hate is a public health crisis. And I want people to sit with all of those things. And I also want it to be a place of hope. I want it to be a place of peace, of joy as they think about the people who were stolen, the people who were impacted, not simply as they were on June 12th of 2016, but as they lived. I want them to consider the impact that they had on other people, the friends, the family members, the communities that they touched along the way, and leave feeling inspired to be that in someone else's life. I think a good memorial challenges people to reflect and be somber, and also gives them hope and inspiration to change the world.
And the annual Pulse Remembrance ceremony is on Thursday. What do you want people listening to our conversation now to take away from this moment?
The thing that I would leave people with is I struggled with how to make sure a legacy for my best friends did them justice, because they gave so much to me. Drew and Juan, my best friends, were the first people to challenge me to be my most unapologetic self. They're the ones who dared me to be fully me. I owe so much of who I am today to them and their bravery, their audaciousness. And what I hope every time people take away when they're reflecting on what happened at Pulse is that that's what's lost when hate is handed a gun and given license to kill. And it's our job to protect the next generation of Drews and Juans and Brandons, the people who aren't quite sure if there's a place in the world for them, who, like me, maybe move thousands of miles away from home to try and find somewhere new to be themselves. It's our job to wrap our arms around them, to make sure that they feel valued, to pave a better, safer path for them moving forward. So I hope you get the opportunity to reflect and be in community with each other. And also, I hope you leave understanding your charge is not just to honor those stolen from us with words, but to honor them with action.
Brandon Wolf is a survivor of the Pulse Nightclub shooting and National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign. At the beginning of our show, you heard from another survivor, Orlando Torres. He worked as a promoter for the Pulse Nightclub. He hid in a restroom once the gunshots started. Here is more of my conversation with Orlando Torres about the night that changed his life.
You start thinking back, yeah, it's 9 years, but even though it's 9 years, it still feels like it was yesterday. As a reminder of so much mass shootings that keeps going on throughout the United States, of the churches and the schools, and it just opened up our wounds again to reflect on what tragic horror that we went through, so many hours, and losing friends that you knew that you don't see anymore. And so we can comprehend with what's going on today that keeps reflecting on what we went through on June 12th, 2016. So it seems like it was yesterday, and it still seems like it. I just can't believe 9 years have gone by.
Is there anything you could say to people who are on their own recovery journey or trying to heal that are looking for some hope? Is there any advice you can give to them?
Well, it's hard, to everyone that goes through it takes it in differently. It's like like when you mourn, everybody mourns differently. It's hard to give it advice when, to each his own is how they keep carrying it on their shoulders, or they're always nervous wherever they go. And I try to give the advice of, wherever you go, if you hear any loud popping sounds, shootings of some sort, always look at your exits wherever you are, whatever venue, restaurant, look where you can exit quickly, because, unfortunately, a lot of my friends, did not know this was going to be a mass shooting that evening. You never know if that gunman is coming up to your door or the entrance of your restaurant or venue, whatever, and is there to kill everybody. Because if you don't get out, you become a victim. And it's a shame this is the norm that we have to have these days, because in schools, I grew up with fire drills.
And you just moved to Puerto Rico this year. I'm wondering how you're feeling being away from Orlando for the first time.
Yeah, it was a hard decision. I moved there in the day after Thanksgiving in 1988. I came out into the LGBTQ community when I lost my mom back in 2001. And, a friend of mine took me to Southern Nights. And from there, I kind of enjoyed myself and enjoyed the drag shows. People were very friendly, very talkative. So I ended up becoming a promoter at Pulse Nightclub every Monday night for Latino night. So I developed thousands of friendships that I know people out there, and it was tough to leave that behind. So many years that I've planted my roots there, and it was very hard to make that move. But I was glad to know that they do have a memorial park here dedicated to the 49 Angels here in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So I'm not able to make it down this year. I will definitely be there when they do build the memorial finally, after so many years of a waste of time and promises that were broken. And so June 12th, 2025 here, I will definitely be showing up for the first time at the memorial that they have here in Puerto Rico, because there was a lot of, Puerto Ricans that were born here or lived out here that was victims when they were at Pulse. So I'm just gonna, show my respect here in behalf, knowing that I've done it traditionally in Orlando at the memorial and the events that the cities have given. It's gonna be different, but at least I feel that I'm still with some of the angels that are from here, and show representation and respect over here at June 12th.
That was Pulse survivor Orlando Torres. After the gunman was killed, Torres was pulled out of the nightclub by Orlando SWAT officer Timothy Stanley. Next on Engage, Stanley talks about his evolution in law enforcement since responding to the Pulse nightclub shooting, lessons learned, and the work he's doing today to save more lives. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. The June 12th, 2016 mass shooting at Pulse is one of the deadliest in American history. Orlando SWAT officer Timothy Stanley responded that night, and he is one of the officers involved in the shootout that killed the gunman. What he went through has a lasting impact on him and the way he now helps agencies prepare for active shooter situations. Stanley has since retired from OPD and works as an inspector with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. He joins Engage to discuss his experience, and he starts by sharing what he remembers about responding to Pulse.
It was actually just a blur. I actually had to ask my wife what anniversary it was. Like it's the 9th anniversary, and that seems like it was yesterday for me. I'm sure everybody says, even Orlando probably said that, but it's funny because my wife wants to see the building. So we may do a drive-by to go look at it because she's never seen it. So that really? With the anniversary, that brought that up before they tear it down.
This is the last remembrance ceremony for families, survivors to visit the nightclub before it's torn down to make space for a permanent memorial. What feelings come up for you when you think about it being?
I just remember all the heroism that night from all officers, fire department that came in. I remember the victims. Orlando, obviously, him and I have a relationship. That's what I remember about that night. It's just the heroism I saw. Even with the victims, he mentioned the cell phone, which is funny because there were so many people. That's all they were worried about, cell phones. Everybody we met, encountered, wanted their cell phones. But just brings back memory. The lady that was in the bathroom, the very last lady that we pulled out, I got to talk to her. She's had a child since then. She was the only one that was wondering if she survived. So we got closure with that. She did.
I have the question for you from the perspective of law enforcement about closure. How do you feel closure? Is that possible?
Closure, yeah, we need it. Closure for us is they brought the SWAT team back to the building after FBI got done with what they did, and it answered a lot of questions about what we saw that night, of what we did, what occurred. So that was closure. Closure was also meeting with the victims, getting to talk to them and do stuff with them. That was closure for both sides, for them and us. Because a lot of times we walk away, we don't know what the outcome was.
The FBI is meeting with victims and families this week before the investigation is officially closed. Are those meetings with law enforcement therapeutic?
Yes.
Yeah.
For both. It just it just answers questions, and I always talk about the dispatchers. They don't get closure a lot because they're just on the phone. So we also had dispatchers involved. They have closure too, of just the outcome because they just hear the audio part of it over the phones. So I think it's very important. We can't do it all the time, obviously, but in this case, it was unique.
You've since retired from the Orlando Police Department, and you're working with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Yes.
Tell me about what's changed for you. What do you do now?
Florida Department of Law Enforcement brought me on. After Pulse, we started a training for response to an active shooter. Not waiting for backup, just go. Get in there and stop the threat. So FDLE brought me on to start this program, solo response to active shooter. And we've been across state Florida, out of state. Other states are adopting this program, what we're doing, what we're teaching. It's more robust, more dynamic of responding by yourself to go into a building to stop the threat.
What kind of impact do you think that program is having? Sounds like
huge.
Across the country.
Already we've had success stories where we get called from agencies that have been involved in an active shooter. Naval Air Station in Pensacola, we had just taught Escambia County they had the terrorist event, the active shooter, and they responded with all our training. They called us immediately thanking us. So we've received several phone calls thanking us for the training. And people say that I can't give you courage, but we can fabricate it. So we put them, our training puts them in that situation, the worst case scenario, the pulse, the volley of gunfire, the smell, the distractions. We do all that so that when they encounter it, their mind has already been there and they just respond.
What would you tell new first responders who are just getting into law enforcement about handling this responsibility?
Train, both mentally and physically. There's a mental aspect to it too that we're involved with also. FDLE's created a mental health program where people such as myself, or I have a partner, Pete Solis, that have been in pretty traumatic events, that we're sharing our story now to mental health officials who are helping the police officers. For the new officers, you have to take care of yourself mentally and physically. The tough guy days are over. Get help. So that'd be my advice.
The stigma that would surround first responders of having to be tough and unaffected, has that evolved over time?
In my era, I tell a story when George DeSalvi got killed. Worked on him, manhunt, and 12 hours later, I'm back on the road. That's back in our era. But now they realize, because we're losing a lot of police officers to suicide, so it's more acceptable now. Now they're teaching us, it's more open. People like myself who have this reputation of tough guy, if I'm saying, hey, it's good to get help, get help. So it goes a long ways.
Retired Orlando Police SWAT officer Timothy Stanley is an inspector with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I reached out to an FBI spokesperson to ask about the goals of their meetings happening this week with survivors and families, and I want to share with you part of what they told me. Quote, the FBI remains committed to serving the victims and families impacted by the Pulse Nightclub shooting. As stated in our letter to the families, the meetings this week are providing families with the opportunity to ask final questions before the investigation is closed. While all investigative measures have been completed, there are still some administrative items that need to be finalized. In the aftermath of the Pulse shooting, the need to address the psychological stress experienced became clear. Within days, UCF Restores, a trauma and PTSD treatment resource, started working with the first responders and others in need of support. Deborah Vidal is executive director. She joins Engage to discuss managing trauma-related issues for people impacted by mass violence. I start the conversation by asking Dr. Vidal to share her immediate thoughts about how the community would be impacted by the events of that night.
What I was thinking about was that this was a trauma that was going to affect everyone on different levels. So there's a very specific trauma that happened to people who lost a loved one on that day or people who were injured on that day. I knew there would also be trauma around those who responded to the event. And finally, I knew that this was something that was going to affect community as a whole. These kind of mass events do not just occur in a vacuum. It reflects back on everyone who's part of the greater community where this violence occurs.
I want to ask you about that community impact. What is the emotional or psychological impact to the broader community who was crushed by what happened, even if they didn't know the people as individuals?
I think it revolves around issues of safety. First of all, none of us in our communities ever really think that something like this can happen to us. And so when an event occurs in our community, we take it personally because we have an identification with the community. And second, I think we can relate to the individuals. This was obviously a crime of hate. And the fact that someone decided to come to this community and create this type of disturbance, this type of crime, is something that affects all of us in that community. We believe that we should be safe, that our community exists because we care about each other, and someone came in and tore all those beliefs apart for all of us.
You were telling me that you were thinking about all the people that were going to be impacted by what was happening at the Pulse Nightclub. Is it all a shared PTSD feeling, or am I oversimplifying?
I think it's broader than that. I don't think we can say that everyone had PTSD.
Okay.
I think what we can say is that everyone experienced a trauma. And people have different reactions to trauma. And there were many in the community who were angry that this had happened. There were many who were anxious and depressed. There were a number of different feelings that occurred. And I think that we have to be careful about using a term such as PTSD when in response, people can feel a myriad of different emotions.
Can you talk to me about how trauma treatment has evolved in the last decade as these events have increased domestically? There was a time when mass shootings were rare, isolated. Today, that's simply not the case. So, how has the treatment evolved with this increase in mass shootings?
I think the treatment has evolved because we know that different people are going to be impacted. So we have treatments that have become very effective for people who were actually there at the incident that day. They have very specific memories that occurred and they have very specific fears as a result of those memories. And those people need a targeted treatment for what really happened at that event at that time. But for the broader community, there still needs to be something that can deal with their fear that this has happened in their neighborhood, their feeling that, this is no longer a safe place. And also, I think their ability to want to do something about what happened. So it's not just a feeling of helplessness, it's also a feeling about how do we turn this around? And I think in many cases, we don't think about something that's called post traumatic growth, which is this idea that we can become stronger after a traumatic event has occurred, as opposed to only feeling damaged or only feeling lessened. We can build from this. It's almost like we're making meaning out of something that we don't understand at all, how something like this could happen, but we're going to do something about it and make the world a better place because of it.
You were mentioning people who are actually there. That made me think about first responders. But they have experience with horrible things. They deal with vehicle accidents, they deal with murders and abuse. Can you help me understand why something like Pulse has such a lasting impact?
I think there's two reasons for it. The first reason is the simple severity of the event. So yes, first responders do have experience going to a traumatic event such as an automobile accident or the murder of an individual that happened as a result of a fight. But this was simply the number of people who died or were wounded in that particular area. A first responder said to me, it was like we were in a war zone. So it's the severity of the trauma that can really impact someone in that way. The second thing is, I think, again, the idea that this was almost unexplainable for a period of time, that someone would come in and just decide to do this in a place where people were just going to have a good time. And that someone could decide to come in and shoot everybody and ruin a good time or take their lives is something that's difficult for us as human beings to really get our minds around. Unfortunately, as you said, because now it's happened more often, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that someone had within his or, sometimes her heart, the feeling that they just have the right to come in and end the lives of so many other people. In other words, this was not an accident. This was a deliberate attempt to kill a large number of people. And that is difficult to get your head around.
Absolutely. Can you talk to me about the treatment? How do you treat a first responder who is coping with this many years later?
So, our treatment of first responders involves several components. And I think you're right about saying several years later.
Mhm.
A lot of people think that they'll be able to get over it, and some will. But we often have people come to us many years later and say, well, I haven't gotten over it, so maybe it's time that I get some treatment. I think the first thing we do is we look at what are the things that are still bothering them? What are the triggers? For post traumatic stress disorder, people will identify certain things that bring back those memories. For the night at the Pulse shooting, for our first responders, some of it was the smell of alcohol because it was inside a bar, the sound of a cell phone ringing. That was one that created a lot of flashbacks for first responders because as they were going through the club looking for the killer, all they heard were all these cell phones ringing. So what we do in exposure therapy, which is the treatment that has the most science behind it for PTSD, we expose them to the sights, the sounds, the smells that trigger these flashbacks that are part of their post-traumatic stress disorder. And by doing this in a very controlled fashion and over a number of treatment sessions, the brain learns that just because a cell phone rings doesn't mean that suddenly there's a killer on the loose, or that just the smell of alcohol doesn't mean you're going to suddenly encounter so many people who have died or were injured. The other part of the treatment is that we work specifically on the problems that people talk about that accompany these flashbacks. So, lack of sleep. So, we teach people how to take care of their sleep and how to have better sleep habits. Anger management, because a lot of first responders and people who survive these mass shootings still harbor a lot of anger about the event. Also, for some people, something we call moral injury or survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
Uh, why did that person get shot or injured and not me? We find that often in military personnel, but it can occur with first responders as well. So we recognize now that PTSD is a complex treatment and we need a comprehensive solution in order to achieve the best possible treatment outcome.
Have you found that any stigma that might have been attached to officers who, people expected them to be not have emotions, they're just tough? Is there more of an acceptance that PTSD is real, mental distress is real? Has that evolved over time, accepting that it's okay, they need help?
Yes, I think for first responders, it has resolved over time, and more are coming forward. And even at the administrative level, more people are willing to admit that a lifetime of seeing trauma does not, no one should be able to just take all these traumatic events and feel nothing.
Yeah.
People don't go into professions of first responders because they dislike other people. They go into them because they want to serve. They want to serve the community. And so we're now realizing that that lifetime of trauma that first responders face can build up and that it may not be just one specific event, but the whole career of events that finally leads to a point where first responders, you have to step back and say, I'm not okay.
Mhm.
And it's bothering my relationships with my family. It's interfering with my ability to do my work. And it's time to get help. And once we do that, and once people can understand that just because these things have bothered you, it doesn't mean you're broken.
Yeah.
It means that you just need some time to face what's happened to you and to deal with it, and then go back to doing your job more effectively.
Yeah.
Part of breaking the stigma is getting people to understand that PTSD is not a lifetime diagnosis from which you can never emerge. Now, I want to say that you will never be the same after one of these traumatic events. These kinds of trauma change all of us in specific ways. And what we want to do, though, is have people break through that stigma that they need years and years and years of therapy. Our intensive outpatient program has been very effective in a 3-week period of time of really helping people overcome their PTSD.
Deborah Beidel is Executive Director of UCF Restores and Pegasus Professor of Psychology. Orlando and Orange County leaders dedicated June 12th as Orlando United Day, a day of love and kindness. Next on Engage, a celebration of pride to support youth in Central Florida. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. We've been remembering the Pulse tragedy and the ways it has impacted people across the Central Florida region, looking back at that night in 2016 and forward to the ways in which the survivors and life-saving first responders are coping today. We'd like you to share your stories about carrying on after a tragedy that left a scar and the healing that has helped to bring our communities together. You can email us at engage@cfpublic.org, or you can send a talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app, or you can text us 833-793-9633. Pulse was known as a gay nightclub, a safe space for the LGBTQ+ community. Keep Dancing Orlando is a phrase echoed by many in the wake of the tragedy to celebrate life and show that hate would not win. The Zebra Youth Organization serves LGBTQ+ youth ages 13 to 24. They're hosting Pride Prom, a night over the rainbow, at the end of Pride Month on Friday, June 27th. Zach Burns is a mental health counselor at the organization. He joins Engage to talk about planning the free event and the importance of a place like Zebra Youth in providing a safe space.
In the wake of the Pulse shooting and in the current socio-political climate, especially in the state of Florida, especially for young people in the state of Florida, I think an organization like Zebra Youth and several other of our peer organizations like the Center or OYA, I think those places are super important because it gives young people a place where they can feel safe and a reminder that those spaces still exist and that there are people who are committed to ensuring that that space is there for them and making sure that that space can be protected and as best that it can be. And it reminds young people of like community, especially within the LGBTQ plus community, that idea that there are other people who are like there to support you and that we can be stronger together. That has been degraded, especially as late. So I think having that reminder for young people that like there is a community, there are people there for you, I think is super helpful.
And we are talking in Pride Month. What does Pride mean to you?
I myself identify as like a pansexual person, and I think that when I think of Pride, I think of the idea that like there is not just a month, but there is a feeling and an understanding that there is a place where you belong always, and that the person you are and the identities that you hold are not just important, they're not just valuable, they can be powerful in a lot of ways. And so I think that Pride is a reminder of that power and how that power historically has helped to shape and change the world to be more welcoming and to be more inviting for people who genuinely do just want to be themselves. And so that's kind of like my perspective.
That leads me to ask you about Pride Prom. Tell me about that event and your involvement in planning.
So this will be my second year being involved with Zebra's Pride Prom. For me, the event is like a great way for our youth and the youth of Central Florida to have, again, a space where they're able to like be their most authentic selves. We do it every year. My involvement is very similar to the involvement it was last year. I kind of help with our Glam Day, which is basically an opportunity for the youth to get specific resources to help them kind of like access that more authentic self. So that includes hair, makeup, boutonnieres, corsages, anything that they need right before prom to like help them feel again more authentic, to feel like they're able to like be their true self and to just enjoy the day. We host the prom every year. This year it is going to be at the Plaza Live near downtown. And we have two separate proms. So we have one for youth between the ages of 13 to 17. And then we have another prom later in the evening for youth 18 to 24. And so we do both of those proms. It's usually a really great time. The youth get to like come out, they get to dance, listen to music, interact, meet people, come with their friends, and give them a space, especially, like I said, when those spaces feel like they're far and few in between.
This year's theme is Rainbow Wizard of Oz. Tell me about how that came to be, if that represents something in particular.
The origin of that was interesting. We were just kind of like going back and forth, talking about different ideas, things that we like, things that like we feel like would resonate with the youth. And this idea of like a rainbow in general was kind of like our general idea of like, oh, we want to do something that's rainbow themed. We really want to like do something creative with that rainbow. And once someone, I think, said like, oh, a night over the rainbow. And then that kind of led to like Wizard of Oz, like over the rainbow. And so then we kind of started playing with that idea. And I think it really just exploded from that. And we really like the idea of the overall ethos of Wizard of Oz. When you think about it, it's this idea that like people kind of have that innate like value to be themselves already. And like that whole journey that Dorothy and her friends go on is kind of like the understanding and self-exploration of like, well, you've already had all these things that you've needed to like be yourself and be genuine. And you just really need that reminder that those things are like kind of like internal and there with you. And so I think that's a really great message to like reintroduce to a new generation of youth. And so I think it'll be really fun, really exciting. And we're going to try and do a couple things to like theme it and pull some quotes from the movie and things like that that I think can be really great.
Are there any themes that you guys nix, like this really isn't going to work, as you were planning?
There were a couple. I think one of them was like a black and white theme, and we were like, oh, that could be good, but it's not as much opportunity for the youth to like do like a lot of like colorful, fun things I know the youth enjoy doing when it comes to these events. Another one I think that we like got super close to was kind of like a fantasy theme, but we felt like it was super broad, and so we wanted to kind of narrow it down a little bit more. Those were just like some of the like bigger contenders that we were kind of like struggling with. One of them was kind of like doing modern twist on Wizard of Oz, so like similar to like some of the things that like you see with like Wicked, but we were like, no, we're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, absolutely not. But yeah, it was like a very fun, exciting process. But yeah, we had a lot of like ideas that didn't make the cut.
When I think back to prom, it was a big deal then. It was kind of a rite of passage. I want to know, what kind of response do you get from the youth attending after prom?
Something that I hear from a lot of our youth after the prom is that they didn't feel or didn't get the opportunity, for like our older youth especially, to enjoy their own proms in the way that they wanted to, or they didn't feel welcome, or they didn't feel like it would be enjoyable, and that they were not only able to enjoy our prom, but felt like it was very surprising with how much they enjoyed it, because they never thought they would have the opportunity to come as they are to a space like that that historically like didn't feel welcoming to them. And so I think it's really cool that we're able to kind of like I don't want to say recreate, but like reintroduce the idea of a prom to a generation of people who are like, hey, then maybe this isn't a space for me, or maybe I shouldn't go to this. And so I think that is like my favorite thing to hear is like, oh wow, I actually really did enjoy this and I didn't expect that.
Zach Burns is a marriage and family therapist and mental health counselor at Zebra Youth. Registration for Pride Prom closes this Sunday. We will post a link on our website, cfpublic.org. That's all for this week's edition of Engage. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sharon Stone. All of our shows are available on demand at cfpublic.org. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.